Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Existential Side Quest. I'm Jenna.
I'm Kimber.
And today is our second episode in our mini series on Ceres.
You love saying that.
I know, it is really fun now that I know the pronunciation perfectly. So today we're actually going to be looking at an angle on Ceres, talking about nourishment, how we nourish ourselves, how Ceres in our charts can point to areas of or suggestions for deeper nourishment. When we talk about Ceres and we talk about how we care for ourselves or care for others, it's important to be mindful around whether the actions that we're doing or the things that we have planned or the boundaries that we have set are actually serving us as well as serving our higher purposes in life.
Yes. And so Ceres is connected to societal progress and was like the goddess of harvest before Persephone was abducted. And so that's why we're really focusing on this nourishing side and what does that actually mean?
It's interesting too, because when you think about the glyph for Ceres, it is that it's agriculture based. So it's like we're really honoring today, sticking to the roots of Ceres beginning, Ceres before everything kind of traumatic happened to her.
Yeah, it's the sickle. So that when you're like cutting down the harvest.
Yes. Is it just a sickle or is there some other little
There's
thing?
a sickle, and I don't really know what else the other thing is, but it's like I always assumed it was just a sickle cutting, like you're holding like a sword situation.
Yeah, I like that. We could probably pull tarot cards on it now that
Yeah.
we're talking about swords. Yeah, Ceres is, it's interesting because whether you have a prominent Ceres or not in your chart, there is a depth of wisdom within your Ceres placements. This is one of the major asteroid goddesses. So granted, upgraded to planet, not actually, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So
So,
not,
do you
no, go
know?
ahead.
Oh, I can just say so it was dwarf planet. It was because it kind of was connected with Pluto, but it's lighter weight than Pluto, and so it's been kind of drifting into the asteroid belt. So when it was kind of recategorized from dwarf planet to an asteroid, even though it has the same composition as Pluto, and it really is a planet, and it's only because it's with other asteroids that it's referred to as an asteroid by some astronomers, which is kind of annoying.
That is kind of annoying because it feels like it goes back and forth, like how
Right.
it kind of
Yeah.
identifies, which actually kind of points to the fact that we can look at it through so many different lenses. The
Hmm.
fact that we're talking today specifically about nourishment. The reason also that we pulled the moon into this discussion is because a lot of times we look at the moon for how we nourish ourselves. Nourishment meaning healing, nourishment meaning self-care, nourishment meaning, those lunar instinct based pulls about like, this is the irrational thing that I think is going to help me feel whole again or feel
Right.
happy.
And it's about our not just ourselves, but how we take care of others, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting too because where the moon is most at home in Cancer, Cancer is a very feelings-based sign. It's very intuitive, it's very irrational. But then thinking about the fact that Ceres is most often and most anciently associated with Virgo, which is not a water sign, it's an earth sign. It's almost like Ceres is showing us the more earth-based or the more practical ways that we can bring ourselves care, give ourselves nourishment. So it's like if the moon is sort of describing what we feel or what we need to feel safe or feel emotionally held, Ceres is kind of showing us that how that care can be given or also withheld or balanced and negotiated between different parts of our lives.
Yes, I love how Ceres is connected to both Taurus and Virgo, and Venus and Mercury rule Taurus and Virgo, and their glyphs all look somewhat similar, but just with different closures. But it's interesting. I like that you were talking about how the moon can be with that emotional caretaking and nurturing, and Ceres kind of adds in the physical and how we need to physically care for ourselves and nourish ourselves, and that connects to our emotional stability. Sometimes you might be really leaning into that physical care and emotionally starving, or you're emotionally comfortable and physically exhausted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We also like to point out that there's a subtleness to Ceres as well.
Mhm.
And that subtleness can really be embodied within that lens of sometimes we are really taking care of ourselves, but it isn't actually helping us to feel better. Like there's this subtle difference, this subtle communication between nourishment and actually feeling nourished. And Ceres really starts to embody that, as well as kind of show us more information, give our moon placement more information about, well, how else can we dive deeper into these rejuvenation goals and find ways to restore nourishment at a deeper level.
Yeah. That's interesting because I think about because Ceres connects with food, and I'm thinking about diet too, because it's just what is maintaining versus sustaining, and thinking about the word sustenance having to do with your feeding yourself. But I was like, what does maintenance versus sustenance really, what's the difference? And I'm thinking about what comes to mind when I think of maintenance, and I think about maintaining your car. And it's just that it's periodic. And sometimes when we approach taking care of ourselves with like, oh, this is a self-care day, when really ideally we're doing consistent daily rituals that are self-care. It shouldn't be like a tune-up situation where, oh, I'm time for my biannual self-care. No, it's like that's when you get into that whole resentment and burnt out situation, and that's why it can be really subtle, because we're not keeping like tabs on it.
Definitely. And I like the idea. I'm going to put our little question up now too.
Yeah.
Maintaining versus sustaining. Really check in with yourself. Which one are you doing more of in your life? I like that you brought up the idea of daily rituals or like things that you do over time, because sometimes when we get into a habit of like, well, this is just what I do to make myself feel better, what can happen is maybe that action or that behavior fit our needs at a certain point, but now our needs are different, whether it's because we've grown as a person or we're in a different chapter of life, or the transits, the astrological weather is just different. So we need that adjustment. So sometimes if we stick to a routine, it can go from being sustainable to actually just being just not as fulfilling, not as enriching, not as rejuvenating and restorative. And then at that point, we can start to be kind of in this state of like, well, why am I actually feeling sort of burnt out, even though I'm doing all these acts of self-care?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking about diet again and how it connects to this self-care, because, there's different types of carbs or fat and protein, and there's processed foods. And it's like if you're focusing on calories, that feels very maintenance, where, oh, I'm getting the calories I need, but not all calories are made the same. And, or, different carbs can actually give you more energy. I think that's the difference is maintenance is about keeping it as it was, and sustenance is about are you getting the energy to sustain life? Like you're going to need, if your life, you have more events going on in this time of your life, or if you're more stressed, if you're giving more energy to other people, then you actually need more sustenance and self-care. And in our society it tends to go the opposite way, where when we're giving more and nourishing more people, the self-care part and nourishing ourselves kind of goes out of the window.
Yeah, it's like we take for granted the fact that, oh, well, this worked before, so I don't actually need to mentally, consciously engage this with my whole self and look at it in a mindful way because I've just decided that this works. But then all of a sudden it kind of doesn't. It's interesting too to think of Ceres and the fact that we're talking about the cycles, we're talking about spring, summer into fall and winter, and especially where I'm from up here in the Northeast, where we have 4 seasons. The This is Ayurveda a little bit, but the idea with Ayurveda and nourishment is that your food should change with the seasons. It's almost like Ceres, her attitude, her goals, what she was thinking about was changing with the seasons, especially in the time of, or in the point of Demeter and Persephone. It's like a time of deep mourning, a time of longing, a time of despair versus a time of abundance, a time of joy, a time of reconciliation. So in Ayurveda, we would say that like right now it's turning into springtime. Spring up here in Maine is very wet. It's very slow. It's the cool, wet mud, which is very different than like the chill of winter. In wintertime, everything is very light and airy. It's almost like that anxious energy because there's just no density in the air around you. And what we need at that time is going to be more grounding, warm still, but more grounding foods like thick soups, things that really nourish ourselves and keep us grounded, keep us in that hibernation zone. But then when we tune into what our needs are at this time, it's like we don't actually need heavy, dense foods because the weather is heavy and dense. So now we're looking for things that are hot and getting ready to get us going, sort of like Aries energy. We're starting to need to get going.
I love that. Yeah, I do think when you were talking about how the diet changes with the seasons, it made me think about how in the Ceres myth, this is the beginning of seasons, and Ceres, when Persephone was abducted, stopped eating. And so did Persephone. And where, if we knew this was happening, or just kind of being aware of seasons and thinking about how sustenance should change, or what activities we use for sustenance should evolve with what's going on in our lives, would really help us to prevent that whole withholding, where sometimes there's this, when in stress situations, we may not actually look at ourselves and say, oh, I need to tend to myself or give more care, but we actually withhold and allow ourselves to not accept care from others if people are trying to help and support. So Ceres can also be really connected to disordered eating or issues with that, like in times of stress and loss.
Yeah. It's almost like the inner world is trying to match the outer world. And even if that outer world feels really dysfunctional, we internalize that and the dysfunction comes out through other behaviors such as restriction or problems with nourishment through food. I like that Camille brought in another lens of cycles, which is eating different foods during different menstrual phases.
Yes, I love that.
And it's interesting because we could look at it through like different menstrual phases, which is like month to month. We could do it different seasons, which is year to year. We could also talk about different seasons of life. Like in childhood, when our brains are more growing and developing, we need lots of fats, we need protein, we need carbs, we need all of this, enriching food that's going to give us the building blocks for life. And then later in life, our needs kind of shift and we learn to honor that. And then at later stages in life, when we're kind of in this we're disappearing, like we're getting ready to join the ethers. It's like our food really shifts then too. I know a ton of older people in their 70s and 80s, and they eat very little at this point.
Yes, that's so interesting. I love thinking about just different cycles in our life.
Yeah. Jensen is engaging the maintaining or sustaining question. She said, this is a tricky question. Pluto is conjunct mine currently. I'm not sure what that means. So I'm noticing how it's conjunct your Ceres currently? Is that what you mean, Jensen?
So it's transforming how you're approaching maintenance and sustenance.
Wow. That's really, if you feel comfortable, tell us what house it's in, because that's super interesting. When we take note of Ceres, we can talk about the different signs that Ceres is in, or we can talk about the different house positions to give us more clues as to what actually would be deeply nourishing to ourselves. And to have go ahead.
No, keep going.
Well, to have a to have a planet like Pluto going over that, asking us to kind of like unearth everything, bring it all up to the surface for examination and shed away what isn't actually working, what isn't serving us.
Yeah, I'm interested because Uranus is going to be squaring my Ceres and thinking about how if that's going to shift how my Ceres is showing up. But when I think about them maintaining and sustaining for myself, I feel that I am sustaining more emotionally, physically, more physical activities than I ever have in like recent years. But I do think my Ceres and moon are connected via a square. And I feel sometimes it's easier for me to get the emotional sustenance down. And then if that's out of whack, the physical activities are much harder for me to lean into and maintain. So I need to feel emotionally nurtured and taken care of before I can kind of add in those physical routines that would actually, it's like a catch-22 where they would actually help each other. But I am always like, I need to get this moon together before I can lean into the physical nourishment.
It reminds me of like, so I shouldn't even say that I do this because right now I'm struggling to do it, but me and my husband go to the gym a lot. That's part of our self-care. That's part of what actually does keep us happy and nourished. The drive to the gym, I'm not usually happy. I'm not usually excited about the fact that we're about to go spend at least an hour working out. And, it's sometimes hard to whether it's a self-worth thing, to say to myself, hey, I need to pause being productive in these other areas of my life because this is actually long-term going to keep me sustained, be nourished in this area because I'm able to activate my body, start some self-care, feel really good, process food,
Mhm.
all of that.
It's all about worth. Like you're worthy of this time and action spent on yourself.
Yeah. And I like that you brought up the aspect between your Ceres and your moon because that I feel like is very telling as to, if somebody is nourishing their moon or they feel like they're following what their moon really desires, but then they're still feeling kind of undernourished or under rejuvenated. It's like, well, maybe Ceres and that aspect to Ceres can give you some information, kind of like you're saying with the physical activity and then the square to your moon. And it's like, well, is this actually like, how do I get this going? That tension of a square.
Mm, yes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's just there's also just that tug of war of between undernourishing self and overgiving to others, and which kind of connects to that Cancer low archetype as well. I'm just thinking too with like my personal fertility journey of just there was also this sense of guilt to, oh well, I don't have a child, and so it's like, oh, I can parent myself though, I can take care of myself. But there was this sense of, can I, like, people who say like, oh, life has more meaning when you have kids, or it's like this, or you don't have any responsibilities. Like, I have responsibilities, they're different for sure, but I had to kind of have tension and kind of working through, do I believe my life has meaning? Because it needs to. It has to have meaning without children. And because also then we kind of fall into that shadow of Ceres where if you do have children, you become almost like a helicopter mother and not able, and like that over attachment situation. But it was been just like a really interesting journey of, I think I was maintaining, back to Jensen's question, for several years, and then, or probably my whole life. And I've just recently got into sustaining because I'm viewing myself without worrying about how I'm giving to others. And my Ceres is in the fifth house. So I love children and taking care of people. But it's like, oh, I'm also just worthy of redirecting that energy and some of that energy towards myself and nurturing. And I don't have to earn it.
Mm.
Yeah.
I bet that can be even trickier because another part of the fifth house is like joy and pleasurable experiences in our society, while our society holds up parenthood and motherhood as this like defining feature of a lifetime. Our
Mm,
society does not hold up joy or creativity or expressions of pleasure to the same level.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's an eighth house moon square. So yeah, it's been a great transformative experience.
That's so good. And it's interesting too, to as much as a square is, people can argue this, but probably the most difficult aspect to have between any part of your chart. All right, we're in agreement with
Yeah.
this. It's
If you
interesting.
disagree, let us know. But
Yeah, please let us know. We would love to debate that right here, right now. We're here for it. But to think about it as like the other aspects people could have between Ceres and a prominent and
mhm.
related part of their chart, such as the moon, like say it's a flowing aspect, like a sextile or a trine, or some very powerful major aspect that, is potentially very difficult, not as difficult as a square, such as an opposition or a conjunction. But
Yep.
then on the other side of things, what if your moon and your Ceres don't make even a minor aspect to each other? Because in prepping for this episode, I was looking at a bunch of different charts of my clients, especially my clients who have either had themes of abandonment or loss or motherhood journeys in their lives. And one of my clients jumped right out at me, because this is somebody who has 6 children, and they've put a lot of their identity, a lot of their skill set, a lot of their energy into the raising of these children. Very Cancerian, very lunar actions. But then why this person was coming to me was because they were saying, I love my children. I want more children. I enjoy everything about my children. But for me, I honestly feel very undernourished. And that was an invitation to say, well, it looks like your Ceres and the nourishing self function and the
Mhm.
ability to have those earth based boundaries around things, as well as earth based goals around nourishment, isn't quite aligned with that lunar intuitive function of the moon.
It's like, so really it's there's this the Ceres square moon, but then also when there's no aspect, which one's more challenging, but it's like finding a way for them to balance. When you were talking, it made me think of that the phrase, you have to fill your own cup before you can pour into others. And so you there's this, if we're only focusing on the mothering and not nourishing ourselves, what is that actually setting up? And seeing, you're talking, when you're talking about like the productivity and even like children in the fifth house, that's such a physical expression of creativity that it does get overvalued compared to creative expression and joy in other ways. And so it's just interesting of how do we reclaim that taking care of yourself and nourishing self while you are also nourishing others is not selfish and is actually selfless.
Yeah. And
I
is
would
actually enabling you to show up more fully in the moments of nurturing others.
Right. It's interesting. Because I know I brought up my mother last week, and just thinking about her Ceres is conjunct her moon and Pluto, but it's just one of the things I grew up, I want to be a mom, but it's like because she had a nightly bath, like she nothing was going to interrupt that time. She also had her own friends, her own like activities outside of us. And so when we she was not afraid of being an empty nester. Like when we all left, she was happy for us and was okay with this new shift in that mother child relationship, which
Mm.
I do. But I remember thinking, oh, I just love that she wasn't overly, like she wasn't living vicariously through me. Like it felt like a very different type of relationship than when I connect with other people that had a different one of just, she was taking care of us but also still making time for herself. And I just really admired that of
Mm.
just when people are saying, oh, you'll lose yourself in mother, I was like, I know you can, but just I think some people can maintain or sustain their own identity, there you go, sustain, in that next chapter or trans cycle of life.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. And the idea of a conjunction, that fusion, making like basically a super planet, it's like it's working together in your mom's chart, the Ceres function as
Mhm.
well as that lunar function. So it's like it can be very profoundly nourishing, which it sounds like that was her experience. But I wonder too if there was ever a time where it felt almost like all consuming, like it was such a focus. Yeah.
Yeah. You're making me think too. Like I was just thinking about that with, I said she had a nightly bath, but just thinking about how in different phases of our lives, I'm more of an intuitive eater, but when I was a teacher, well, there's a very set schedule. I can't just be like, oh, I'm hungry and now I'm going to eat. And so if I didn't adjust my diet and eating schedule for the day to my new work schedule, then I wasn't going to eat. And I had to learn the hard way. I was like, wait, I went all day teaching and I left my lunchbox in the fridge because I'm not used to not having access to it all day. And
Mhm.
when you are a mother or a parent, now you have all these other structured needs of other people that maybe your rituals that help you connect with your Ceres and nourish will need to be more structured and set. Like you have to be more intentional with how are you feeding your Ceres.
While also staying mindful that you're not just in a habit of maintaining through that.
Right, exactly. Like, exactly. And how would we do that?
Well, I think mindfulness is a big part of it. Like when you're in those Ceres actions, those Ceres moments, checking in with yourself, how nourished am I actually feeling in this moment? And doing those activities or those reflective times, whatever it is that Ceres, however you actually manifest that behaviorally. So I can imagine if your mom in the bath was like, take a deep breath. How do I feel? Is this actually calming me, or can I not wait to move on from this? And it's almost like, well, maybe at this chapter in the year in life, if hypothetically the bath wasn't working as well as it was
Mhm.
before, maybe it's like, okay, well, I'm feeling really restless in here. Maybe I should pivot from a bath per day to swimming every day. Like something
Yeah,
related, but
but
embraces that subtle shift.
that's interesting. Because it was always about reading a book, and sometimes it'd be reading a book like at the community pool. And so how it again, seasons will help weigh in those things. I also like how you're talking about when we can lock into, oh, this is what's going to be nourishing to my series based off of the sign or house that it's in, and being creative, make a list of what are things that sustain you. And sometimes it doesn't always have to be connected to that sign and house, but just making sure that we're not getting drilled down of, oh, the fifth house always means children, or the fifth house always means dating, and
Mhm.
or your Pisces hat. It's there's so many different hats that the signs wear.
Mhm.
And so being creative on like, okay, maybe we just want to have a routine of there is time to feed your series, but what that activity is needs to be open to evolving or can change day by day.
Mhm. And when we see that, or we start to feel that lack of nourishment, that burnout, subtle burnout kind of creeping
Mhm.
up, it's like, well, if this isn't serving me anymore, it's time for me to reflect. And it doesn't necessarily mean that I was wrong before either. Like honoring the fact that our needs evolve over time. And even when we look at like decades in the past and start to, once we have decades on earth, conscious decades on earth to reflect back on, remembering like those were the expressions that we chose back then. We can pivot now, but even if they did or didn't serve us in the past, not shaming ourselves around that, because Virgo can be very self-critical.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, we have a new person in the chat.
Oh, that's Christina.
Hi, Christina. I'm glad you know everyone's names. Camille said that she had to learn boundaries as a mom with her own children, but now they also value boundaries, solitude, and autonomy. That's awesome.
Hmm.
Sometimes, definitely, I'm learning this 100% with my teenage children. As we grow as adults, we are showing them what it looks like to grow and what it looks like to value the new either behaviors or the new things that we value in our lives, what that looks like, to honor that and to actually really call in these new structures that we use in order to maintain balance.
Which is really interesting because you and Camille both have a sixth house series. And with that boundaries and just the mentoring mentee aspect of the sixth house, where you are truly part of nourishing your series is modeling.
Mm, wow, yeah. That's so good because it's interesting to even think about going to the gym as that. I totally point to as part of
Mhm.
my series nourishment, and my kids are sometimes like, "You're going to the gym? You're gonna be gone for a while." Like, and I'm like, "Yeah, like, I'm sorry, like, I don't know, I'm not even sorry, like, this is what that looks like," and I say to them, "Do you wanna come?" And occasionally, like, once or twice, they have each taken me up on it, but at for right now, the transfusion of series archetypal information is more about like, it's okay to carve out this time. It doesn't necessarily mean they need to learn my workout routine. They just need to learn that it exists.
Right. Before we pivot into the our real life chart example, I do have one question. Um, And I want, could you change the
Yeah.
question to what are things that truly sustain you? But I do want to think about how sometimes what will sustain us, and that's the difference between maintain and sustain, that growth or that supporting our evolutionary growth is not going to feel good, but it's still nourishing.
Mm.
And so what if, so I don't want to suggest we thinking about, oh, this self-care is I'm going to treat myself or it's going to feel great. But sometimes, even if you're working out, you can feel pain when you're working out, or
Mm.
if you need to work through something in therapy, like that can be painful. So just not putting um, sustaining and nourishment into this feel good all the time category.
That's such a good point, because sometimes the maintenance side is the kind of
That feels good.
not serving feel good. I'm thinking of doom scrolling. Like, how many people, that's the habit, and it's like dopamine drip as you're doing that, as you're seeing those reels and getting that blue light and kind of laughing kind of absent-mindedly, but you really are just maintaining. You really are just like holding that status quo and doing a behavior that probably doesn't serve you.
Right. And which does connect back to last week with that whole attachment and letting go. And I like when you're talking about maintaining and that connection to potentially keeping habits that no longer serve you, and how Ceres and really leaning into our Ceres can help us break habits that we're ready to break, or create new habits in new ways, and just being creative where we're not getting overly attached to this is my routine, this is how I take care of my Ceres, and it can never change, because then we kind of get into that maintaining, and then open to what will actually sustain me, what will actually be helpful for me to be able to move forward. Sometimes that's going to be a difficult conversation. Sometimes that's going to be surrendering a situation that no longer serves me.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
just, right. Like, I really want, and I do think that kind of connects to that real life chart that we're going to be looking at, of just the thing that is sustaining is not always going to be like when we think about nourishment, oh, this feels fulfilling.
Yeah. And when we lean into these shifts as well, what that means for the people around us who either identified us with that old behavior pattern, or maybe like I'm thinking of Jensen with her Ceres in the 11th house, the house of groups. It's like, and Pluto going over it, how many groups are no longer nourishing Jensen that she's being called to release? And is that judgment? Of course, it's going to be uncomfortable when people who kind of counted on you to either be their mentee or counted on you to just be another voice in the pack or another face in the crowd, when you're not showing up anymore.
Right. And that connects to that Ceres synastry we were talking about, where when you release something or nourishing yourself, like it can also shift and impact this person's Ceres. And that does not mean we continue over giving and neglecting ourselves.
Mm. We have some really good comments in the chat. I'm going to just start from the beginning. Camille, this has been especially tough with one of my girls because her Ceres is on Camille's Ceres. Oof. Yeah, you did say that right. Your Ceres are conjunct. That's really good. I feel like there's a direct transference there, but what we were just talking about with the discomfort, as we honor those nourishment needs, there might be a lot of mirroring going on, Camille, between you and your daughter, especially if what you are instilling in your life is something that's going to make the people around you uncomfortable. And she's seeing that. And there could be a way of her being like, well, I am not doing that. I'm not implementing that for myself. I'm staying true. I'm hanging tough. Why aren't you doing that? And it's like, this isn't about martyrdom. This is the opposite of that.
Yes.
Did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, yeah, that was great.
Okay. I need help with carving out time. I always offer to have them go with me, even if I want to be alone. And someone always says yes. Oh, that's the worst.
In making sure you're not offering things that don't feed your moon and Ceres. It's okay to offer for them to go sometimes, but if you are a Capricorn moon, then you need your solitude, and it's okay to defend that.
100%. Or finding ways to structure boundaries and some level of aloneness. Like when I go to the gym, if my son does come with me, he only wants to walk on the treadmill.
He doesn't need to be with you.
Exactly. Or even headphones. How many people at the gym are completely in their own little space because they're listening to their own little music? Yeah. So finding ways to kind of set those boundaries in ways that work for both. It's not so much about compromise as it is finding the path of least resistance and most nourishment, that balance.
Yes.
And Jensen answering the question, what are things that truly sustain you? Routine, accountability, self-awareness. Those are good. Those are really good.
And I love that those also connect to things that don't always feel good. When we talk about that sixth house, that the day-to-day work, like the grind.
Yeah, definitely. What do you think? Are we ready to share our chart?
Yes.
Our chart of the moment. So I know it was in the description.
We're going to talk about Dolores Huerta.
Getting it up. Sorry. Here we
And
are.
we decided, this Dolores has been in the news in the last week, but Jen and I were just looking at her transits of Ceres last week, and so we thought just looking at her natal Ceres and moon connections, and then what moving Ceres was doing during the time that the New York Times article was released, where she shared her story and experience. Really spoke to all the things that we've been talking about the last couple weeks. So let's just look at her birth chart first and really look at that natal Ceres and moon. And can you, yes, thank you. I was like, make sure that so this is her Ceres. And then where's her moon, Jenna?
Right over here in Virgo in the 11th house. And do you guys see this red line? It's a very thick red line, emphasizing how strong, how almost exact that aspect is. This is a tight square.
Yes.
Very tight square. And with the luminaries, we honestly do extend the orb. So even if this wasn't exactly, it's less than 1.5 degrees, we would still consider it a square, but we see this very potent aspect as well as aspect pattern regarding this series. But do we want to stick with the moon series first?
Yeah, we can just start with the moon. So we're looking at the 11th house Virgo moon. So a big part of her emotional needs has to do with like being of meaningful service to others and like working within her community organizations, which we know was true. What else would you add, Jenna?
I know that with Virgo, we talk about how Virgo itself is a subtle energy. It's about making things a little bit better. That's why it can be kind of nitpicky and analytical on like a fine detail level, because Virgo really can see the smallest of imperfections as well as the larger ones, but the smallest, in order to bring about some sort of change in either whatever it is that it's examining. But in Dolores's case, especially with the 11th house, long-term and groups, we're talking about her having this analytical mind, this analytical intuitive understanding of what could make things a little bit better for the group, for the whole, for society at large over the long run.
Right. So we see Virgo with like that attachment to the ideal and perfection, like we can always improve. And then the 11th house has those Aquarian, that collective progress and change. Beautiful.
The other thing about Virgo moons, and this is something that's a little bit more shadowy, is when this analytical mind is either pathologized, like people say like, oh, you're just too critical or something like that, or there's any sort of backlash at all. What can happen is that Virgo can turn inward and start to kind of nitpick the self and blame self for having these insights. It's no longer seen as kind of the divine discontent with layers of insight and awareness around imperfections or subtle bumps in the road that get in the way of things flowing as smoothly as possible. It's now seen as like this like compulsive negativity. And when a Virgo moon or Virgo in general is kind of squashed from sharing their insights or pathologized around it, what can happen is they don't want to share anymore and they turn it inward, and then they start blaming themselves for everything.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I also want to just add that with the moon in the 11th house, that she dawns on her society, like she shows up as mother and like very nurturing towards those groups that she does, acquaintances, people that she doesn't know very well. So that's like a lot of responsibility. And also that Cancer's on the 9th house cusp, and so that also connects to the moon, of just how much her philosophy and the beliefs that she's willing to take a stand for do connect to that 11th house vision and goals for herself.
Yes.
So which is a lot of pressure on her moon. We've even tied it in Ceres.
A ton of pressure. Do we want to talk about the opposition to Mars?
Yes.
Yeah. So you guys can probably see the triangle that's being made right here, this red line, and then they both have red lines to Ceres. So what we're looking at now is the moon opposite this Mars in Pisces in the 5th house. So this is actually going to be the most important part for Dolores to focus on through her lifetime, is integrating this moon and its desires and what it needs to feel nourished and whole, as well as this Mars. Now we know Mars in evolutionary astrology, wherever we have Mars in our chart, is an area where we are developing courage in this lifetime. It's an area where experiences that are probably very evoking a sense of fear are going to come up for us, because courage is about feeling fear and then doing whatever needs to be done anyways. Courage isn't about a lack of fear. It's about feeling that fear and moving forward. So Dolores having her Mars developing courage in the fifth house, among other things, we're talking about joy, pleasure. This is also the house of children. There's a lot in this house that we can kind of see activated in her life.
And that and sincere, like authentic self-expression. And I do think it's important to note that the moon is opposite Mars, and Mars is the chart ruler. So this fifth house Piscean work is very important to her path towards self-actualization as well. And that tension, so there's this tension between her feelings or her emotional needs and this capacity to develop courage to do this thing that is potentially scary.
The other thing about this Mars that makes it even stronger, in addition to it being her chart ruler, is it's her self node ruler. So that tells us that she's intimately familiar with this energy. Her self node being in Scorpio, which is ruled traditional ruler Mars, as well as being in the 12th house, which has an affinity with Pisces, which is the sign of this Mars. It's like she has some level of deep understanding of this martial function in her life. Could that deep understanding, when we look at the self node, we're talking about a past life, and we tend to tilt a little bit towards the negative side, because the whole idea is something went wrong there and we're coming back in this lifetime in order to try to incorporate the opposite energy of that and move forward. Take those gifts from that energy that we're familiar with, but start to release some of the unsustainable or unhelpful habits, those karmic waves from the past of habits that came forward with us with those gifts.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost saying, like with Dolores, like, yes, this Mars is critical to your chart. There's a lot of gifts wrapped up in it that you're intimately familiar with, and probably a lot of habits from the past. And as we all know, habits can be really hard to break.
Yeah.
Yep. 12th house, 11th house too can be energy that doesn't manifest till later in life, such as when you're 95. No, just kidding. But all right. So now we have this opposition between Mars and the moon, and we're working to integrate that courage in the fifth house, as well as that lunar intuitive knowing, the key to her happiness in the 11th. And as she starts synthesizing these together, that energy blasts into the apex planet. And the apex planet is the dwarf planet, Ceres, in Gemini in the 8th. Do you want to take that first?
Right. No, I just wanted to add that I know we talked a little bit about the tension between that courage and happiness, but there's an opportunity to integrate it, and that both can coexist. But at first there might, especially with that 11th house moon of, oh, I can only do this and not the other.
Definitely. And sometimes what ends up happening too is when we lean one side, one way or the other within an opposition, we over-identify with one side of it. Oppositions especially, somebody out in the world will come into our life representing the other energy of that, trying to frequency-wise equalize the balance of those energies until our soul, our evolution, our growth as individuals is at a place where we are incorporating both of them, integrating that moon with that Mars.
Right. Okay. Now, 8th house Gemini Ceres. What are you thinking, Jenna?
Well, Gemini likes to talk. Gemini is about perception, communication. It's also about listening. 8th house, we're talking about taboo territory. We're talking about potentially things that are deep underneath her subconscious, maybe listening to things that are deep underneath her subconscious. Nourishment is potentially achieved through listening to those deep truths under there, those deep insights, or unearthing what needs to be spoken out into the world.
And intense emotional experiences. And then also still 8th house is still connected to Hades and Pluto, but they're like this letting go. What can you release? So if we were thinking about what we talked about with nurturing, just thinking about Ceres with nurturing and also with the loss and transformation, there's Dolores has this gift, so we know Ceres can be a wound and a gift of being able to nurture self and others through communication or her voice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, sorry, keep going.
Oh, just with potentially topics that are considered taboo.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
that's what I was going to say.
Oh, go ahead.
No, that's it. That's exactly what I was going to add.
Perfect.
Because of that it being in the 8th house.
Yeah, and it's interesting that we're talking about the 8th house, we're talking about Mars, and we're talking about the moon. And whenever we see themes repeating themselves in a chart, we're like, well, we're definitely on to something. And you know what's repeating all these themes is her Pluto.
Yes, and
As
Pluto's the co-ruler of her south node.
Yep, that's what I was gonna say too.
Yeah,
The
go ahead.
modern rulers have to do with a little bit more of a psychological approach to things. So this is telling us that there's some Pluto wound, psychological wounding from past life, as well as just from the fact that this is her Pluto placement around healing, potentially around family, potentially around mothering. And it also has to do with belief systems, things that she believed, things that she thought she had clarity on, like this was the path that I had to go. I had to do XYZ. And maybe that I had to do is a lower expression of Cancer, which can be sacrificing self for the healing and betterment of others.
Which also connects to that 12th house and Pisces energy and institutions. So that was when you were talking and thinking about using your voice. I was thinking, looking at the 11th house moon and the square between Ceres and the moon, just that there can also be this risk of, it's putting pressure on her to speak out on things that are challenging the status quo, which can be a behavior connected to the 11th house as well.
Mm-hmm. And I could see, as much as she's been speaking out about, things about the status quo and how these things need to be changed her whole life, as life went on, the level of depth and vulnerability to what she was saying has only been increasing. That is definitely showing us how she is getting more courageous, how she's getting more in touch with those deeper truths, and how she's starting to pivot from putting society first to maybe in a way putting her own needs at the head of things.
Yes.
There's so much we could pull in this.
I mean, I just also want to tie in the fact that it's mutable, where it could have felt, because we see in Dolores's life where she was leaning into this Ceres gift and using her voice and like speaking up for things, and then also was hiding things that would potentially put that work at risk, even though that was potentially causing more harm to herself of holding back those things. But there's this balance, mutability. I just think that the flexibility and just, can I do both? Or I'm not like, she's not being self-sacrificial in this moment, but then there were other things where it just felt like there's a lot of tension and confusion about, can both of these truths live out? Can I speak out on both of these things without it harming the other mission?
And it's interesting to see Saturn in the 3rd house as well. Saturn in the chart can represent a blockage, or in a more uplifting way, it can represent an area of our chart where spirit is encouraging us to place a lot of energy, a lot of intentional effort in that area. So through the years, as Dolores was, being an activist, as she was moving through all these different chapters in her life, she was putting a lot of effort into spreading her message, into spreading her word. But ultimately, that Capricorn great works, that mountain she needed to climb, an even deeper, more vulnerable mountain appeared before her as she worked this Saturn and showed her just how deep of a truth she needed to speak.
And it's interesting too, because I think we can start to pivot to the transits, but just looking at how Mercury rules both her Ceres and her moon, or disposits both of them. And Mercury is the planet of communication and voice, and it's in that 6th house, and it's conjunct her North Node. So that's literally the path she's working towards in this life. And I love that, because we see the 5th house with Mars, that courage to express yourself authentically, Saturn, that great work around communication and speaking with integrity and like what is true. And then we see all the mercurial repetition between Ceres and the moon. So, and then do you want to look at the transits?
Yep.
So we want to look at
I'm going to go to the 18th. There we
when
go.
the article came out March 18th. Uh, oh wait, sorry. Ceres is directly on Mercury and her north node.
Right here.
Yes. So it's when that happens, a Ceres is activating that planet and her north node in her chart. So it's really giving her an opportunity to release attachment to things that are no longer in service of her north node path, and releasing habits from the past life, and also using her voice, like reattaching to what is her authentic voice, what is the truth that she's going to share now, what is her new mission, like what is of meaningful service and contribution to this world.
Mhm. Yes, definitely. And we see so many of the planets that we already touched upon being activated in this, like we're talking about. It's a little wide, but she's in a Mars return. There's an extra dose of courage in her life right now. Jupiter, expansive Jupiter, is all but stationed on her Pluto because Jupiter just turned. So it's moving very slowly, really emphasizing that energy at 15 Cancer. And that Pluto can't help but be like, ooh, it's time for me to expand. It's time for me to actually show myself in a larger way.
Yes. And I just love that. So the moon is on her Mars, or had just passed her Mars, depending
Mhm.
on the time that the article came out. And so it's repeating that moon opposite Mars in her natal, just bringing the moon Mars together. And so that courage to do what's right for her moon needs.
Mhm.
And then with Ceres, just looking at, so moon's on her Mars, and then Ceres is on her Mercury North Node, and kind of connects to what we were saying about sometimes like the opportunity for nourishing yourself or sustaining yourself isn't going to be an easy or feel good experience.
Mm.
Sometimes bringing up something that is difficult, or that requires courage.
Mhm. And it's not to say that what she's speaking out about now is any more courageous than what she was speaking about 40 or
Exactly.
50 years ago. That was a big risk to be, first of all, a BIPOC woman speaking about, injustices in our society. She's already at a disadvantage being a woman and not being white. And then she's out there raising her voice, basically putting a target on her back and speaking about things for a marginalized community, a marginalized population, about the injustice. That
Yes.
took a lot of courage.
Right. And that's the thing, like you have the same birth chart your whole life. And so it's just like it's another side of Ceres that's getting an opportunity to be worked out right now. So and I love that. I mean, she's 95. So your chart you're still working with your chart even in your 90s. Like that's the goal here, is that we're always working towards that north node.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's like Spirit is saying, Dolores, you absolutely have more energy and vitality to keep going and to keep
Mhm.
sharing and to keep. It's interesting to see her son being in Aries. How she shines her light into the world is through this courageous action, is through facing her
Right.
fears.
And just thinking about how, I said Ceres gives you this opportunity to reflect on where you over identifying with the role of caretaker versus cared for. And so this was an opportunity to kind of like rebalance it of, okay, I need to, this is for me, this is to care. And this is also still caring for others, a different marginalized group than the group that she was representing in the past. And she still represents, but it's just it's just kind of tweaking that energy.
Mm.
Is okay, where can I lean in and take care of myself, or what do I need, what would be sustaining for me in this moment?
Definitely. It's also interesting to see that Leo midheaven, because we talk about the midheaven being like our purpose or our mission. And to have
Mhm.
Leo there means it's something that's actually the truth of your story, the truth of who you are. Leo at its highest expression isn't just being performative and acting. Leo at its highest is being some level of like leading with its vulnerability. She was leading with her vulnerability way back when she was an activist, but also now, very much so.
Yes, I love
Yeah.
that. And with her son that rules Leo in the sixth house of meaningful service and contribution, it's just beautiful.
Yeah. It's so interesting too to think about the North Node being in Taurus and how we talk about, oh, the South Node in Scorpio can be this like hellish kind of circumstances. And when we have the North Node in Taurus, it's about like kind of calming down, centering, coming home to self. That doesn't necessarily mean it's easy. That doesn't necessarily mean your life is just a walk in the park or intended to be a walk in the park. This is very much not a walk in the park at achieving a North Node in Taurus.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot that her soul was kind of demanded of in this lifetime, and she has obviously very much risen to the occasion. Wow. I'm looking at this Chiron. It's almost like she's so close to getting a second Chiron return. We don't usually see that. Yeah. It's very interesting because Chiron itself in her chart, being on her relationship angle here, we know that there's some wounding around relationships. And we see Chiron in charts. We talk about a wound that you're born with, but these wounds can also echo forward and repeat in this lifetime. So we can definitely see that in her story, woundings around partnerships, wounding around seeing herself as equal, even within the idea of seeing workers and laborers' rights as equal. Like there's so many different lenses with which she experienced this Chiron on her descendant. And now we see Chiron in the sky had just passed her sun, kind of saying to her, like with the sun ruling that midheaven, like, hey, where is the wounding that you can actually bring out into the world? What actually wounded your vitality in a way that speaking your truth through that Ceres will nourish you and make your mission even that much larger, making that midheaven even more pronounced.
And you're integrating them, like, so her Dolores's Ceres needs to be interpreted with pulling in the moon and Mars, and the way you just said all that integrates all three together. And so, and whenever we're looking at moving Ceres and where it's hitting in our chart, always think about the natal promise, or what is Ceres doing in the natal chart, because that will kind of speak to what this invitation from Ceres is. Similar, we're going to talk about Chiron in a couple weeks, but whenever we think about Chiron is also a wound, and Ceres is as well. So it's in times whenever Ceres is hitting sensitive points in your chart, there could be a time of loss, like we were talking about, or a time, or we need to lose in order to gain something. And then there's also this opportunity to either nourish yourself or nourish others, and kind of like find a balance in that caretaking for self or caretaking for others. So whether it's going to be the experience of the wound versus the ability to kind of correct or to heal it really depends on where you're at in your evolutionary journey. But it'd be really interesting to kind of look at not just where your Ceres is in your natal chart, but what other planets is it squaring or opposing in your natal chart, and kind of adding those planets in to your interpretation of your Ceres.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. Seeing these aspect patterns and seeing what is Ceres a primary function in your chart? Is Ceres something that is asking for you to integrate it on this very sophisticated, intellectual, mindful, conscious level? In Dolores's chart, yes. And it's asking for her to do a lot of work almost behind the scenes first with this Moon Mars integration of that opposition. The one other thing I wanted to say is when we see this South Node and we know that it's ruled by Mars, and we see this North Node, and as much as it is ruled by Venus, which is right there as well, Ceres being on it is kind of saying like, hey, I'm holding your hand right now, kind of bringing you to where you need to be. And so we say, Dolores, what does that feel like for you? Oh, well, her natal Ceres here in Gemini, this square is so activated in herself, pushing her, speak your truth, because speaking your truth at this time, these taboo truths, finding your voice for this is actually how you are integrating this story, as long as it is taking courage. And of course, everything she's saying now, everything she's sharing, especially on such a large stage, that's taking an immense amount of courage.
Yes. Could not have said it better.
Whew. This is a deep episode. I'm going to stop sharing because we're almost at time.
I know. If anyone has any questions.
Jill joined us for the last 15. Thanks, Jill. Oh, what an episode. I feel like I'm going to need some Ceres nourishment after this deep dive. My Ceres is in a biseptile to my moon, so it makes my expression of, or my synthesis of Ceres to moon kind of less intellectually or intelligently driven and more like this like nuanced kind of like whimsy, fanatical, kind of just driven there by chance type energy. So hopefully spirit takes the reins.
Right. So Ceres is moving through your first house right now.
Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
It's moving through my seventh because we have opposite risings.
Yeah, one thing that I really so as an adoptee, Ceres is a lot, is a big focus of mine, and Chiron, of course. But it was interesting to see Ceres and Chiron together, and when they met, it was on my North Node. So it was like spirit telling me this year, like, hey, in case you weren't quite sure yet, this your North Node mission has a lot to do with bringing Ceres and Chiron together,
Mm.
especially at this chapter of your life.
That's really interesting. I'm curious what other people's experiences are because I feel my Ceres transits on my nodes and on my moon Pluto the most, and I just assumed because those were strong in my chart. But I'm sure I could totally see Ceres hitting the nodes being extra activated compared to other planets.
Yeah, especially if Ceres is like we're seeing in Dolores's chart, if Ceres is so prominent as part of a deeper piece of that nodal work.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, we're at the end of our episode. Next week, we are going to be closing out our mini series on Ceres, talking a lot about liminal spaces and those guides that meet us during these times of transition between the light and the darkness and in the gray. So I'm very, very excited about this topic.
Yeah, this is going to be a very
Another myth.
Piscean view of things.
Yeah.
So awesome. Thanks for joining us or catching the replay, and we'll see you next week.
And yes, Camille, it was intense, but so thank you for staying tuned in.
Yeah, thanks for hanging tight.
Bye.